My friends, Canada is broken. 12 years ago, Canada was the envy of the world. Businesses thrived. Our universities were gold standard. We had very low crime. Immigration worked, bringing law-abiding, contributing families to help themselves and our country. Our balance sheet didn't suck. We had punched way above our weight class in Afghanistan. People, for the most part, got along, and Canada was considered a land of opportunity, kind of like the U.S. with none of its problems. The biggest issue in the minds of most Canadians was, when was the Stanley Cup finally coming home? I travel regularly to the United States for business and for pleasure. I'm in touch with American entrepreneurs, and I like to talk to Americans that I encounter. They're friendly people. They're happy. They're not automatons blindly following Donald Trump. They have their issues with him, but they see him as a necessary tonic to the outright insanity that was the Biden administration. Open borders, lawlessness, diversity, equity, and inclusion, a leader who was clearly not in charge, or compos mentis for that matter, and a country that had quite clearly lost its way. Canadians, however, seem willfully blind to what our country has become in just over a decade. So blind that if an election were to be held today, they would return the Liberal government not just to a new term, but likely with a supermajority. Mark Carney was placed into the leadership of the Liberal Party of Canada and has now manufactured, or arranged, if you will, a parliamentary majority. Let's just look for a moment objectively at what Canada has become under the leadership of Mr. Trudeau and Mr. Carney and the Liberal Party of Canada. The political and economic relationship that Canada has with the United States constitutes 80 to 85% of our economic activity, has been destroyed. Canadians now see the United States as a greater adversary than even communist China. Gross domestic product, GDP, per capita has fallen and continues to worsen. The per capita GDP, a Canadian GDP, is now worse than every single United State. Our GDP ranks us behind Russia. We do not qualify to be a member of the G7. We don't make anything here. All measures of happiness in Canada continue to decline. According to the C.D. Howe Institute, we ranked 15th in happiness in 2024. That's down 10 places in 10 years. For people under 30, Canada ranks 58th. Affordability is simply not a thing. Government-created programs and government-supported oligopolies have shafted Canadians for decades. We have $8 butter, ridiculously expensive beef, beer, wine, spirits priced to the stratosphere due to excessive government taxation. Cell phone data is 26 times more expensive than in France, 7 times more expensive than in Australia, a country that very much resembles Canada. We have outright separatist movements in Alberta and Quebec, and likely Saskatchewan. It is very likely that a separatist government will come to power this year in Quebec, and they will be demanding another referendum. Our sovereignty is compromised, if not outright failed. There is rampant foreign interference in our elections and many elements of our political life and in our economy, and yet there has been no active measures to restrain it. The promised foreign agent registry doesn't exist. We have no core national identity. Canada's historical heroes have been cancelled like Ryerson or declared historical criminals like John A. Macdonald. Canadian students are not taught history anymore. Walk into a grade 9 classroom and ask them who is Cartier, Champlain, Wolfe, Brock, Macdonald, Laurier, Borden, King, even Tommy the Commie Douglas. They will look at you with blank stares. Canadian and Western traditions are actively attacked in our educational curriculum as colonialist. In Ontario, multiple school boards have replaced the study of Shakespeare with mandatory Indigenous literature studies in grade 11. Nefarious Aboriginal land claims have arguably trumped fee simple, thus imperiling economic certainty and predictability and the basic right of someone to own private property, including their own home. This, of course, has been encouraged by the worst provincial government in this country, that of the NDP government of British Columbia. Churches have been burnt, but we never hear of any charges, let alone any prosecutions. Lawyers who negotiate land claims do it on a contingency fee basis A recent claim yielded almost a $500 million legal fee. That's taxpayer money. I can't think of law firms that build that on massive mergers in the United States. Widespread tolerance and financing of cultures in opposition to Western tradition and Western understanding of human rights is a commonplace thing in Canada. This includes Islamist radical mosques and groups and the promotion of terrorist organizations, namely Hamas. Jewish day schools have armed guards in front of them in some of our areas in Toronto and outside of it. Anti-Semitism is tacitly supported by the mayor of the largest city in Canada. There is active tolerance, if not promotion, of anti-Semitism in Canadian universities. The non-development of resources, oil and natural gas in particular, remains the cornerstone of liberal economic policy. Remember when Justin Trudeau said there was no business case for liquefied natural gas in Canada? Have you seen any liquefied natural gas plants being created? Don't hold your breath. We have no strategic oil reserve. Justin Trudeau sold off Canada's gold reserve in 2015 and 16, one of the first things he did. The rule of law is imperiled. Race-based sentencing is now the rule rather than the exception. The Gladue and Singh decisions of the Supreme Court make that the law of Canada. We have a revolving door bail that puts criminals back on the street the same day they offended. Law-abiding gun owners who shoot at paper targets or clay pigeons are being targeted and threatened with confiscation of their property and police entry into their homes. This is being done largely to placate a small group in Quebec. Statistics and police will tell you that the majority of gun crimes perpetrated in Canada are done with illegally acquired guns. Even the Nova Scotia mass killing, which is held up as the reason for their ludicrous gun legislation, was undertaken by a maniac using guns he had smuggled across the border. Mainstream media is unabashedly biased in favor of the Liberal Party of Canada. To make matters worse, they are financed with government funds. That media is taking the king's shilling. Affirmative action is written into our Constitution. Charter of Rights, Section 15.2, creates and prohibits affirmative action programs regardless of anyone's belief in a right to equality. Free speech is under assault. Parliament passed Bill C-9, Combating Online Hate Acts, which removed the good faith religious defense, which is Section 319 sub 3 sub B, from the Criminal Code, which had previously protected expressions of religious belief from hate speech prosecution. We have failing infrastructure. Nothing works. Try flying in Canada. It shouldn't cost $850 to fly from Toronto to Montreal. You can go to Europe for cheaper. Qatar built a 37-station subway system in 6 years. Toronto took 15 to build a partial subway streetcar down Eglinton Avenue. We'll see if it can last 6 months. Open drug use and homelessness in all of our urban centers is a fact. In certain cities, like my own of Hamilton, with the highest municipal taxes in Ontario, the downtown is nothing more than a zombie apocalypse. I sometimes call it Vancouver without mountains. And the roads are unparalleled in their lack of upkeep. I used to think Saint Laurent Boulevard in Montreal was something to be shown to people, but the roads in Hamilton put that to pale. It's like a B-52 wing ran down Main Street and did its worst. Canadians have falling birth rates. Our population will be inexorably changed from a demographic perspective in only a decade. Healthcare, once the jewel in the crown of the Canadian Confederation, is now a hollowed-out wreck, where people spend hours, if not days, in emergency care or worse, hall rooms. Healthcare is rationed, and now many flee country for medical care. The state of Pennsylvania has more MRIs than all of Canada, and yet we've embraced MAID like nothing else, furthering our descent into what is becoming a culture of death. Massive capital expenditures, or rather capital exits and brain drain, is a reality in Canada. The anti-business regulations and high taxation continue to force people and companies out, and they're not coming back. Multiculturalism is an abject failure. Ethnic ghettos and identity politics are the direct result. Canada's flaccid position on Israel is the product of electoral considerations. Just ask Melanie Joly. Our military is a joke. We recently hit our 2% NATO commitment by including things like foreign aid and the Coast Guard, and admittedly a long-deserved pay increase for our forces. Our destroyer program is 10 years late. They've only recently cut steel, and it is 300% over budget. Replacing our museum piece F-18 fighters is 10 years too late and is now a political football, as Mark Carney wants to thumb his nose at the Americans, even though we have been an active participant of the F-35 program for well over a decade, and many Canadian jobs depend on it. DEI is religiously and rigorously enforced in the military. The Russians have something called a zampulit, or a political officer. We have the same things now enforcing DEI in the forces. Whatever happened to combat effectiveness? The military, through the Express Entry program, is now bringing foreigners with limited ability to test for loyalty, let alone develop capability, to work in our most highly secretive technological areas. There are more people working for Canada Revenue than there are in the Canadian Army. Let that sink in. There's a complete inability to control or protect the Arctic region. Freedom is under assault. Although the Federal Court of Appeal and the lower court unanimously ruled that the use of the Emergencies Act against the Freedom Convoy was unconstitutional, the Carney government has brought it to the Supreme Court of Canada. And knowing what we know about Chief Justice Wagner, my hopes remain dubious that the lower court decisions will hold. There is lowered trust in Canadian institutions, including the RCMP, Parliament, and even the Canada Revenue Agency. There has been a massive expansion of debt and the deficit. Canada's debt is now $1.27 trillion, or $427,000 per family in Canada. Canada's debt to GDP ratio is now 110%. The shrinking private sector employment is a fact. About 25% of the Canadian workforce now works for one level of government or another. There is a complete inability for young people to get jobs, thanks to the temporary foreign worker program. How do you build a national work ethic when you can't get your first job? And today, the Carney government announced they were going to fast-track 33,000 temporary foreign workers to permanent resident status. We have open borders and a rampant abuse of the immigration system. There is a systemized process for criminals and fake students to claim refugee status to avoid deportation. Many judges now refuse to sentence appropriately because they may jeopardize the immigration status of the convicted criminal. We have rampant censorship and more promised under the guise of public safety. If anyone has read history, remember the Committee of Public Safety from the French Revolution and how that ended up. Productivity measured in Canada has fallen every quarter for the last 10 quarters. We have failing technological innovation. $1 trillion has left Canada in the last decade. The government does not dispute this, and it is not coming back. All in all, folks, this country is in deep and rapid decline. You have to ask yourself, given your knowledge of Canadian history, do you believe that Canadians have the inherent and internal ability to right this ship? And we seem prepared, very prepared, to re-elect the very architects and perpetrators of this disaster with a supermajority. Ask yourself 2 questions. Are you better off than you were 12 years ago? And name one thing that the Liberals have made better. Elbows up, my friends. Thank you for tuning in. Leviathan must be stopped.